Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep on feel-good productivity.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at Ali Abdaal's book Feel Good Productivity and kind of dig into
Lock down.
all the core ideas and
Hmm.
and see if we can find some practical strategies for, getting more done
Right.
without burning out.
Yeah, I'm excited to unpack this one.
Yeah,
It's something that a lot of people struggle with these days.
for sure. And Abdal's story is particularly interesting, I think, because he started out
Oh yeah.
as like a total productivity nut,
Hmm.
like almost obsessed with optimizing every minute of his day as a medical student.
Huh. It sounds like he fell into that classic hustle culture trap.
Hmm.
I bet that wasn't super sustainable in the long run.
You're telling me he talks about how it made him just miserable, constantly stressed, reliant on caffeine just to kind of power through each day.
Hmm.
But then he came across this fascinating psychological experiment called the candle problem.
Oh, I think I've heard of this one. Isn't it like something about thinking outside the box?
Literally. So they give you this candle, some thumbtacks, and a matchbook.
Okay.
And the goal is to attach the candle to a cork board so the wax doesn't drip.
Right.
And most people try to like tack it directly or melt it to the board.
Hmm.
But the trick is to use the box that the thumbtacks come in
Oh,
as
right.
like a little
So
platform.
I remember now. Yeah.
And what's really fascinating is that people in a more positive mood were way more likely to solve it.
Yeah.
They were just more open to those creative solutions,
Interesting.
which ties into this idea of the broaden and build theory,
Okay.
which basically says that positive emotions can actually expand our thinking and potential.
But like if we can cultivate a positive mindset,
Hmm.
we can actually become more productive.
Exactly. And Abdal dives into these three key energizers that contribute to this feel-good productivity:
What?
play, power, and people.
Interesting.
So let's start with play, which I think might surprise some people.
Yeah, play isn't usually the first word that comes to mind when you think about getting things done.
Right. But Abdal actually talks about his World of Warcraft addiction.
Oh, wow.
He spent over 4,000 hours playing.
Wow.
And he argues that it wasn't just escapism.
Okay.
He actually loved inhabiting that different persona, experiencing that sense of mastery and control.
So he was tapping into what Dr. Stuart Brown calls play personalities.
Mm-hmm.
Brown identifies like 8 different ways people approach play,
Mm-hmm.
but for our purposes, I think 2 stand out.
Mm-hmm.
The creator and the competitor.
I see where you're going with this. The creator thrives on making things, experimenting, building new worlds,
Right.
which directly relates to creative problem solving at work.
Exactly.
Mm.
And the competitor loved those challenges, pushing boundaries, achieving goals,
Mm-hmm.
which can really fuel ambition and that laser focus on results.
Mm-hmm.
Think of someone like Alberto Gines Lopez, that Olympic climber,
Oh, yeah.
who just seemed to be having fun under all that pressure.
It's amazing. It reminds me of Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow, where you're just so absorbed in what you're doing that you lose track of time.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
And Abdal's point is that we need to find ways to bring this kind of play into our work.
Okay.
He actually started writing on a Post-it note. What would this look like if it were fun?
I love that.
Just as a reminder.
Yeah, such a simple but effective way to shift your perspective.
Totally. And remember, work doesn't have to be a drag.
Mm.
It's about finding that sincerity in your effort, that genuine engagement, as Alan Watts put it.
Okay, so we've seen how play can boost creativity and enjoyment at work.
Right.
But what about that sense of control and agency that drives us to achieve?
Mm-hmm.
That's where power comes in, right?
Exactly. Abdal's not talking about power in a domineering sense, though.
Okay.
More like autonomy, having control over your work, feeling confident in your abilities.
Hmm.
Think of a company like Netflix. They're known for empowering their employees with freedom and responsibility.
Right, which is a huge part of their success.
Huge part. And it reminds me of that study where cyclists were given false feedback about their performance.
Oh, yeah.
The ones who were told they were stronger actually performed better.
Oh, wow. So the power of believing in yourself.
Exactly. That's self-efficacy, and it's something we can actually cultivate.
Okay.
Abdal has some great tips for this. He talks about like flipping the confidence switch,
Which is?
basically acting confident even when you don't feel it.
So fake it till you make it.
Kinda. By changing our behavior, we can actually influence our thoughts and feelings.
Interesting.
And it goes beyond just acting. Learning from other people's successes is another powerful way to boost confidence.
So reading biographies, watching documentaries, surrounding yourself with inspiring individuals.
Exactly. Abdal calls it vicarious mastery experience.
Okay.
But of course, nothing beats actual experience.
Right. The more you do, the more you learn.
The more confident you become.
Makes sense.
It's a positive feedback loop. And it's not just about external achievements. It's also about cultivating what's called a beginner's mind.
Which means,
Approaching things with curiosity and a willingness to learn, even if you're an expert in your field.
so even if we've been doing something for years, there's always more to discover.
Always. And don't underestimate the power of teaching others.
Right.
When we explain something to someone else, we deepen our own understanding and boost our confidence.
It's like that saying, the best way to learn is to teach.
Exactly. But how do we make sure we're working on things that truly matter to us?
Right. How do we find that motivation?
Well, that's where intrinsic motivation comes in. Abdaal highlights this research showing that external rewards can actually undermine our internal drive. Think of it this way. If you're paid to solve a puzzle, you might be less inclined to actually enjoy the process.
Interesting.
So it's about finding that internal spark, that sense of purpose that makes you want to work on something, even if there's no external reward.
Okay.
Like that Reddit user FiletOffice1066, who automated his entire job so he could play video games.
Sounds like he was lacking some intrinsic motivation there.
He definitely was.
Yeah.
But the point is, we all need to find that sense of ownership and meaning in our work. Like Viktor Frankl said, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing. The last of the human freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way.
Powerful stuff. So to recap, we've covered play and power.
We have.
Ready to dive into the third energizer, people?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. I can already tell this is going to be insightful.
So we were just talking about how powerful play and that sense of personal power can be for reaching our goals.
Right, like how they can really energize us.
Exactly. But even with those energizers going strong, we can still hit roadblocks.
Yeah, you're talking about burnout. I think that's something so many of us struggle with, especially these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Abdaal really dives deep into this.
Okay.
And it turns out there are multiple ways we can actually burn out, each with its own, causes and symptoms.
So multiple kinds of burnout.
Yeah. He breaks it down into three main types: overexertion, depletion, and misalignment.
Okay, so let's break those down one by one, starting with overexertion burnout.
Okay.
What does that look like in real life?
Well, it's the classic burnout most people picture.
Yeah.
Feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, like you're constantly running on fumes. That's what happens when we push ourselves too hard for too long.
Right, like trying to sprint a marathon.
Exactly. You might have that initial burst of energy, but it's not sustainable.
Yeah, you're bound to hit a wall.
Totally.
Yeah.
And Abdaal uses this great analogy here, LeBron James.
Okay. Even I know LeBron.
Right.
But what does basketball have to do with burnout?
Well, LeBron is famous for his incredible longevity in a sport where most players peak early and burn out fast. One of his secrets. He conserves his energy strategically.
Okay.
He's actually known for being one of the slowest players on the court when he doesn't have the ball.
Really?
Yeah. So he's pacing himself, not going all out all the time.
Interesting. So he's like strategically resting.
Exactly. He understands that to perform at a high level for a long time, you need to balance those intense bursts with periods of rest and recovery. And that applies to us too, no matter what our game is.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So how do we apply this LeBron James strategy to our own lives? Like, how do we learn to do less but achieve more?
Abdaal has a ton of practical tips for this. One that I found really helpful is this idea of an energy investment portfolio.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's simpler than it sounds.
Yeah.
You basically make two lists.
Okay.
List A is your dream list,
Okay.
filled with hopes, ambitions, things you eventually want to pursue, but maybe not right now.
All right.
And then list B is your active investments. These are the projects you're currently putting your energy into.
So being realistic and focusing on a manageable number of goals.
Exactly. Prioritizing what matters most right now.
I like it.
And he recommends keeping that active list pretty short.
Okay.
He aims for about 5 things, but it could be even fewer depending on what's going on in your life.
That seems doable. Not overwhelming.
Right. It's about setting boundaries and not overcommitting ourselves.
For sure.
And speaking of overcommitting, there's this other great tip he shares, the hell yeah or no rule.
Hell yeah or no?
Okay,
Catchy. What's the idea there?
it's about only saying yes to opportunities that truly excite you.
Okay.
If your gut reaction is anything less than a resounding hell yeah, then it's probably a no.
I love that. It's a great way to filter out commitments that drain your energy.
Totally. And free up space for the things that really light you up.
For sure. But, sometimes we have to commit to tasks that are, let's be honest, less than thrilling.
Like those mandatory work meetings that could have been an email.
You got it.
The key is to find ways to make those tasks more engaging
Okay.
or to reframe our mindset around them. Maybe there's a way to contribute a new idea or connect with a colleague during that meeting.
So even if it's not a hell yeah, you can still find ways to make it a little less painful.
Exactly. And what about those times when we are working on projects that excite us,
Yeah.
but we still feel that urge to jump between different tasks?
Like, is that always a bad thing?
Not necessarily. Remember that study where people who switch between tasks occasionally actually performed better
Now that you mention it, I do.
than those who focused on just one thing?
Seems counterintuitive, but it makes sense. Our brains need those little breaks to reset.
Exactly. Abdaal connects this to the awakening bell analogy from Thich Nhat Hanh.
Okay.
It's about building in those intentional breaks throughout the day, even just a few minutes to step away, take some deep breaths, come back with a fresh perspective.
Like hitting the refresh button on your brain.
Exactly. And remember what we talked about earlier with doctors needing to take breaks even in high-pressure situations?
Yeah, like that advice from the ER doctor.
Exactly. Even in those critical moments, stepping away can help us make better decisions and avoid mistakes.
Okay, so we've explored overexertion and burnout,
Right, doing too much.
and some strategies for doing less to achieve more, right?
What about depletion burnout?
Okay.
What are the signs we should be looking out for there?
Depletion burnout is less about being physically exhausted
Okay.
and more about feeling emotionally and mentally drained.
Mm.
It's that lack of motivation, like posing inspiration, like you're just going through the motions
Right.
without any real joy or excitement.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have felt that, like being stuck in a rut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if we're outwardly successful.
Right.
Abdaal talks about the importance of activating what's called our default mode network to combat this.
Default mode network. That sounds kind of technical.
It is a bit jargony, but think of it like your brain's idle mode.
Okay.
It's that network of brain regions that becomes active when you're not focused on a specific task, like when you're daydreaming, taking a walk, or just letting your mind wander.
So like giving our brains a chance to recharge and process information in the background.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to activate this idle mode is through what Abdaal calls mindful recharging. Okay, I'm sensing a theme here. Mindful play, mindful recharging. It seems like mindfulness is key to all this.
You're picking up what I'm putting down.
But what does mindful recharging actually look like?
It's about engaging in activities that genuinely replenish your energy and bring you joy.
Okay.
Abdaal talks about these calm hobbies, things that are challenging, absorbing, liberating, and with low stakes.
So not just vegging out on the couch.
Right. It's got to be something that engages your mind and sparks your creativity. He also suggests these calm projects,
Which are?
short-term, creative endeavors with a clear beginning and end, like learning a new skill or building something with your hands.
Like having those creative outlets outside of work.
Exactly. They challenge you in a different way, give you a sense of accomplishment.
Makes sense. Think about how you feel after spending time in nature.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's actually research showing that hospital patients who had rooms with views of nature recovered faster
Really?
and needed less pain medication. It really highlights the power of that connection to the natural world.
It does. And you don't need to go on a wilderness retreat to experience this.
Right.
Even a straight walk in a park or adding some plants to your workspace can make a difference.
Speaking of walks, Abdaal talks about how people like Steve Jobs and Virginia Woolf used walking to get their creative juices flowing
Oh, yeah?
and solve problems.
It's amazing how much clarity we can gain when we step away from our desks and let our minds wander.
So we've got Col-M hobbies and projects, our nature walks. But what about those times when we just need to completely zone out? Is there room for that in feel-good productivity?
Absolutely. Abdaal recognizes the value of mindless recharging, too.
Okay.
It's about giving that default mode network time to do its thing, even if it means just staring into space for a few minutes or watching a mindless TV show.
So it's okay to let our minds go blank sometimes.
Totally.
Yeah.
In fact, it's essential for our well-being.
Okay.
Abdaal even suggests scheduling in an evening of oblivion each week,
What's that?
where you give yourself permission to do absolutely nothing productive.
I love that. Just giving yourself permission to relax and recharge
Exactly.
without guilt.
And if you do struggle with that guilt, think about that story of the world-renowned pianist
Oh, yeah.
who was struggling to perform. And his teachers simply said, "You are entitled to be tired."
Wow. Sometimes the most productive thing we can do is just step away and recharge.
Totally. Okay, so we've covered overexertion burnout,
Mm.
where we're doing too much,
Mm.
and depletion burnout.
Right, where we're not recharging enough.
What about misalignment burnout? What's going on there?
Misalignment burnout is what happens when we're doing things that don't truly align with our values and goals. It's that feeling of emptiness, even if we're achieving external success.
It's like that feeling of, is this all there is?
Exactly.
Even when you're ticking off all those boxes on
Yeah.
society's definition of success.
Abdaal uses this interesting analogy. The Oxford English dictionaries struggle to choose just one word of the year back in 2020. Oh, yeah. I remember that 2020 was such a whirlwind.
It was. There were just too many significant events.
Right.
And they couldn't narrow it down.
Couldn't capture it in a single word.
Exactly. And Abdaal argues that the real word of the year should have been doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling.
Yeah.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
Right.
But how does this relate to misalignment burnout?
Well, it highlights how spending our time and energy on things that don't align with our values can leave us feeling drained and unfulfilled.
Even if those things are considered productive.
Exactly. We might be busy, but if it's not contributing to a deeper sense of purpose,
Yeah.
burnout is likely to follow.
So it's not just about being productive.
Yeah.
It's about being productive in the right areas.
The areas that truly matter to us.
How do we even begin to figure that out?
Well, that's where Abdal's concept of alignment comes in.
Okay.
It's about making sure our actions are in sync with our values and goals.
Okay. That makes sense in theory, but how do we actually put it into practice?
Abdal shares a bunch of useful exercises for this.
Okay.
One that I found really insightful is the eulogy method.
The eulogy method. That sounds a little morbid.
It might sound that way at first, but it's a powerful exercise.
Okay.
Basically, imagine your ideal funeral.
Okay.
What would you want people to say about you? What kind of legacy would you want to leave behind?
I see what you mean. It makes you think about what really matters.
Exactly. And it can help you identify your core values and priorities.
Okay.
Abdal also talks about the Odyssey plan, which is a more visual approach.
Okay.
Imagine creating a roadmap of your life's journey, highlighting those key milestones and the values that guide you.
Like creating a visual representation of your ideal life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Guided by your values.
Yeah.
But, figuring out your values and long-term vision is only part of the equation.
Right. How do we translate those big ideas into daily action?
That's the million-dollar question. We can have these grand visions, but if we don't take concrete steps, nothing changes. And luckily, Abdal provides some tools for this too. One is the Wheel of Life exercise.
Wheel of life?
It's about assessing your satisfaction in different areas of your life. Career, relationships, health, personal growth.
Oh, so like a checkup for your life?
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
It helps you pinpoint areas that might need more attention,
Right.
so you can create a more balanced and fulfilling life overall.
Makes sense. What else?
There's also the 12-month celebration.
Okay.
This one's about setting goals based on what you want to be celebrating a year from now.
Interesting. So it shifts the focus from just checking off tasks
Exactly.
to achieving meaningful outcomes.
Outcomes that align with your values.
I like it.
And remember, research shows that breaking down big goals into smaller, more manageable steps can actually make us more successful.
Right. It's less overwhelming and you get those little wins along the way.
Exactly. Which keeps you motivated.
But it's one thing to set those smaller goals.
Yeah.
It's another to make sure they actually reflect our values.
Right? That's where Abdal's concept of alignment experiments comes in.
Alignment experiments.
It's about being curious,
Yeah.
trying new things, and seeing what actually moves you closer to living in alignment with your values.
So like approaching it like a scientist.
Exactly. Testing different hypotheses and gathering data.
Much more playful and engaging than forcing yourself to stick to a rigid plan.
Right. And I think that's a key part of feel-good productivity. Recognizing that alignment is an ongoing process, not a destination.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here.
Right.
The 3 energizers: play, power, and people. The 3 blockers: uncertainty, fear, and inertia.
Yep.
And the 3 types of burnout: overexertion, depletion, and misalignment.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
And I think the most important takeaway is that feel-good productivity isn't about following a set of rigid rules.
Right.
It's about finding what works for you, experimenting and tweaking your approach as you learn and grow.
It's almost like we're our own science experiments.
I like that.
But seriously, there's so much to unpack here.
There is.
I think our listeners are going to want to revisit this deep dive and really absorb all these ideas.
Definitely. A lot to ponder and apply.
Yeah.
And for those who are eager to dive even deeper,
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend checking out Abdal's full book, Feel Good Productivity.
Yeah.
He goes into way more detail,
Mm.
offers a ton of additional tools and exercises.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling energized and inspired to apply some of these concepts to my own life.
Me too.
Mm.
It's a good reminder that productivity doesn't have to be about grinding and pushing ourselves to the limit.
Yeah.
It can be a joyful and fulfilling process
Mm.
that helps us create a life we truly love.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
You know, as we've been talking about all these strategies, I keep thinking back to that story Abdaal shared
Which one?
about his Christmas Day shift at the hospital.
Oh, yeah, where he dropped that tray of medical supplies.
Exactly. And realized his whole approach just wasn't working.
It's a powerful moment, like even when we're working towards a meaningful goal.
The way we approach our work matters.
It really does. It's not just about powering through, it's about making the journey enjoyable.
Right. And sustainable.
Exactly. Which is what feel-good productivity is all about.
I think that's what's so refreshing about Abdal's message. It's
Yeah.
not about rejecting productivity.
Right.
It's about reframing it.
Finding ways to make it feel good.
Yeah, finding ways to be productive that energize us and align with what matters.
I couldn't agree more. It's about that sweet spot between achieving our goals and actually enjoying the process.
And I think that resonates with so many people today.
It does, especially those who are committed to personal growth,
Absolutely. It's not a one-time fix. It's an ongoing journey.
of learning, adapting, experimenting.
Yeah, finding what works for you.
Exactly. But the tools and strategies we've talked about today are a great starting point.
For sure. For anyone who's ready to boost their productivity without sacrificing their well-being.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to turn it over to you, the listener.
What resonated with you the most? What are you going to try this week? To bring more play, more power.
More positive connection into your work.
What small experiment can you run to unblock yourself?
To create more alignment in your life.
And remember, you don't have to change everything at once.
Even small changes can make a big difference over time.
Feel-good productivity isn't about perfection.
It's about progress.
And if you're ready to dive even deeper, I definitely recommend checking out Abdal's book, Feel Good Productivity.
He goes into so much more detail, gives you even more tools and exercises.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Feel Good Productivity.
We hope you've learned something new and feel inspired to create a more joyful and fulfilling approach to work and life.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep experimenting.
And keep striving to make every day a little bit better.